Listen to this next clip and prepare to have your mind blown.
The districts that have historically been created to protect Black voters from, again, being diluted, hither and yon into various districts and losing voting power. Those districts would no longer be protected under federal voting rights law. It could have a swing on the partisan level of 20 or 30 districts. On the Black and Hispanic representation level, it would be even more devastating and could have catastrophic effects. So this is really the whole ballgame as you look at cases pending before the Supreme Court this term. This is the one to pay attention to. And as I mentioned, Brian and I have talked about this before because this case was argued once before in the Supreme Court. It was argued last term in the Supreme Court, and we expected initially the Supreme Court would give it the back of the hand. Then as the term went along, we got more and more nervous because the Supreme Court hadn't ruled in it. Well, at the end of the term, rather than deciding the case, they scheduled it for rehearing. And that rehearing comes up this week. So please pay attention to this case.
The Democrats are enjoying a 30-seat House advantage due to this legislation, and now the Supreme Court is going to rule on the constitutionality because any law that inherently gives preferential treatment to a group of people based on their race is illegal and unconstitutional. Now, I'm gonna say something that might shock a lot of you, but hear me out. I actually think it was fair and just to implement these reversed racism policies and laws like the Voting Rights Act, like affirmative action, post-Civil Rights Act. You needed the heavy hand of the government to force racism against Black people out of institutions, out of laws, out of life, and bring them from unquestionably second-class citizens into the fold as regular citizens with equal rights. In theory, affirmative action makes sense. Black people were historically excluded from job opportunities, thus being restricted in gaining comparable skills to their white counterparts. And Black schools were historically neglected, thus leading to Black children received a lower quality education to their white counterparts and were unable to qualify and compete on their merits. So yes, you hire a Black person who is comparatively less qualified than their white counterpart. But the thinking is, after a few years on the job, they'll develop the requisite skill set to become competent, compete with their white counterparts, and excel on their own merits. And then they'd have better employment, be able to raise their families under better conditions, be able to send their kids to higher quality schools, and voila, the cycle is broken. But baked into that premise is the idea that at some point, these policies will end because the systemic racism will be weeded out through the generations. And that's why it's being heard and ruled on today, because these policies and these laws are no longer necessary. Most reasonable and logical people can point to the election of Barack Obama and say, that's it. That's the end point. Black people have gone from undoubtedly second-class citizens to now being the president of the United States of America. We have officially defeated systemic racism. And I also agree with that. There is no more proof that systemic racism has been defeated than a Black man being elected president twice by a majority white country. But the problem with the left and their obsession with identity politics and woke cultural Marxism is they vehemently disagree that the election of Barack Obama signified the end of systemic racism. Woke people believe that systemic racism is ingrained in every facet of society, even the things we don't think about nor would be considered racism. They believe math is racist. They believe going to the gym and striving for a slim, fit, healthy body is racist. They believe things like punctuality, being expected to show up to work on time, articulation, enunciation are all white supremacist concepts. The talent of a woke person is being able to claim victimhood status and pointing to racism or other injustices in every single little tiny thing. And that's the inherent problem with being woke. If in everything you look at, you see racism, discrimination, injustice. You have to, by definition, not see anything good or positive in those things. And that leads to a way of thinking and a group of people who are perpetually miserable, bitter, and resentful. In their mind, white supremacy and systemic racism and injustice can never be conquered without the complete and total destruction and reconstruction of the United States from the ground up. And because in their mind they will always be an oppressed second-class citizen group, they can justify the preservation of laws like the Voting Rights Act and things like DEI affirmative action. But the acceptance of this toxic ideology forces us to never be able to acknowledge the gains that we've made in civil rights and prevent us from finally living as a united people who are all equal to one another. And Democrats promote this toxic ideology, so when the time comes to repeal these no longer necessary laws, they can just scream and cry racism.